Tonight, Big Tobacco's big proposal to pay billions in compensation to Canadians.
It was his fight, and he died because of his addiction.
Held to account for hiding the health risks of smoking.
It's an absolute historic day.
The potential payout and its future impact.
There's nothing in it to actually reduce smoking.
A countrywide blackout in Cuba after a major power grid collapse. Parties make the final push on election eve in BC.
This is the time for us all to stick together.
We are just going to make sure that we put people at the focus.
And transgender politics hit the campaign trail in Saskatchewan. The scary spike in the cost of Halloween candy. And an inspiring wrestling revival.
This is my opportunity to give back everything that it's given to me.
The stage is set for a showdown showcasing Canadian talent to the world.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. A long-running tobacco lawsuit in Canada is nearing an historic end. The proposed settlement would see three tobacco giants, JTI McDonald, Rothmans, Benson and Hedges, and Imperial Tobacco Canada, pay out roughly $32.5 billion to provinces, territories, and Quebec smokers. The potential landmark deal would settle decades of litigation over the health effects of smoking. But as CTV's Garrett Barry reports, some believe this doesn't go far enough.
A Canadian first, according to plaintiff lawyers. Thousands of smokers will be paid directly for their illnesses by big tobacco companies. Plaintiffs in Quebec can file claims for compensation of up to $100,000 each if they suffered from throat or lung cancer, and less, $30,000, if they suffered from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Smokers from other provinces can file for as much as $60,000 for damages caused by lung or throat cancer, or $18,000 in the case of COPD.
We started this case in 1998. Not a single person in the world had received a single penny from a tobacco company in compensation. And as a result of this litigation, tens of thousands of Canadians will receive very significant awards.
The payout includes those who have since died, like Jean-Yves Blais, who was among the first plaintiffs to sue the three tobacco giants.
He should be here and talking to you. He should be talking to you. It was his fight, and he died because of his addiction.
Money to smokers and families will flow relatively quickly upon approval, but almost half the total payout, destined for provincial and territorial governments, won't start moving until 2030.
Based on the revenues that the companies are expected to make on the sale of tobacco products in the years to come, even past 2035. And so I think that that's where it's very disappointing.
The proposal ends 5 years of negotiations between the parties that started when the tobacco giants lost a lawsuit in 2019. But groups like the Canadian Cancer Society say it doesn't do enough to reduce smoking.
The way this settlement is worded, it keeps people smoking. And these diseases are still going to happen. It's a gift to the tobacco industry.
The deal still has to be approved by creditors and then by an Ontario judge. It's due back in court at the end of the month. Garrett Barry, CTV News, St. John's.
Saskatchewan Power has been handed the biggest workplace fine in the history of the province after two experienced employees were killed on the job.
I hope this highlights that a top-down change is needed to the safety culture. When something like this happens, Weyburn's a close-knit community. These people were dedicated linemen, and really I hope it just helped family, friends, co-workers. I just hope everybody can begin to get some closure from this.
In a courtroom filled with union workers and family members, a judge ordered the company to pay a fine of $840,000. In 2022, linemen fell to their death after the bucket they were in tipped over. The entire population of Cuba was plunged into darkness today after the country's electrical grid collapsed. The island of 10 million people had been facing rolling blackouts for months, prompting the government to take measures to conserve energy. Schools were closed and non-essential services canceled. Those efforts failed to keep the lights on. Now officials say they are taking steps to restore power, but that the process could take time. Hamas says Israeli hostages in Gaza will not be freed until attacks on Gaza stop and Israeli troops withdraw. This comes after the group confirmed the killing of its leader, Yahya Sinwar. The Israeli military released this video claiming to show the moment a tank opened fire on the building where the mastermind of the October 7th terror attack was hiding. He was later found dead with a gunshot wound to the head. CTV's Adrian Gobriel has more on the reaction to his death.
Allahu Akbar. Friday prayers for Hamas's fallen leader echo through Gaza's hollow buildings. While in Jordan, weekly pro-Palestinian demonstrators condemn the killing of Yahya Sinwar by Israeli forces. As the cries of the resistance against Israel grow louder, Hamas's deputy chief confirming there are no current plans to release any hostages. Saying in part, those prisoners will not return to you until the aggression of our people in Gaza is stopped and full withdrawal from it and release of our heroes. It's yet another difficult message for the families of hostages to hear as they worry what this latest development could mean for their loved ones.
At the beginning, I could easily imagine my dad coming home. And I could easily imagine the hug that I will give him. And now it's so hard to imagine it.
And now the killing of Sinwar has left many in the intelligence community trying to decipher what might come next.
It is estimated that the considerable number of the hostages are not alive anymore, and probably the rest who are alive are in a very, very bad condition. The bottom line is that we could not expect, unfortunately, to the immediate release of all the hostages.
Israel's chief pathologist who performed the autopsy on Sinwar's body says the cause of death for the mastermind of the October 7th attack was a bullet to the head. As for who will step in as Hamas's next leader, one man seen as the heir apparent to Sinwar is his brother Mohammed, an elusive Hamas figure seen here in this photo provided by the IDF. The younger Sinwar recently became Hamas's military commander.
U.S. President Joe Biden saying today that he believes there's a road towards peace in the Middle East, though a clear path in Gaza remains elusive tonight. Heather?
Adrian, thank you. Toronto police have made arrests in the shooting at a Jewish school last Saturday.
The safety of the Jewish community and all communities in Toronto remains our top priority.
Investigators say two suspects, including a 17-year-old, fired shots at the school from inside a vehicle in the early morning of Yom Kippur. They are facing a total of 20 charges. This is the second time this school has been targeted this year. 3 provincial elections are underway, with people in BC set to go to the polls tomorrow. A record number of people in that province have already cast their ballots, with more than 1 million doing so in advanced voting. The election there on track for a big overall turnout. CTV's Kathy Lee is in Vancouver tonight.
In the last hours of a hotly contested election campaign, BC party leaders from the NDP, Conservatives, and Green Party made their final appeal to voters.
This is the time for us all to stick together.
The momentum that we have built, the grassroots movement that is really happening right across this province is just remarkable.
That it's possible to have a political party that focuses on a positive vision.
The latest poll has the BC NDP in the lead, with momentum for the BC Conservatives slowing down after leader John Rudstad's debate and controversy surrounding 2 party candidates. Despite that, the once fringe party, garnering fewer than 2% of the popular vote last election, has given the incumbent BC NDP a run for its money. Polls show a small margin between the 2 parties and the Green in a distant third.
Federal politics intruded, as it has in all of the provinces, frankly. So we also saw a federal tide toward the Conservatives.
Their popularity also boosted by the BC Liberals, rebranded as BC United, pulling out of the race 6 weeks before the election.
In the 40 years I've studied politics, I've never seen anything quite like it.
No matter which party forms government, the voters want serious problems addressed.
Definitely healthcare for sure. and public safety.
I have friends that are struggling for weeks and weeks to trying to find housing, and it's very tough. And even when they find it, it's very expensive.
All these issues seem to have galvanized voters as turnout in advance polls have been record-breaking. More than 1 million people have already cast their ballot. Kathy Lee, CTV News, Vancouver.
And party leaders in New Brunswick are making their final pitches ahead of next week's vote, with the incumbent Conservatives facing a challenge from the Liberals and the Greens.
In order to keep our focus and to keep moving forward, we need a PC majority. We need our province to be in the right path. We need to continue to build and face our challenges head on.
In partnership with municipalities, health authorities, doctors, nurses, and healthcare professionals that are ready to move and act with urgency on this issue.
Just as was the case when their parties were the government, neither are willing to commit the necessary funds to create this.
Voters in New Brunswick go to the polls Monday. A SNAP campaign announcement is grabbing attention on Saskatchewan's campaign trail. Scott Moe has announced his party would create a gendered change room policy if re-elected. Now the leader is being accused of using vulnerable kids as political pawns. CTV's Alison Bamford explains.
A policy around school change rooms, Scott Moe's first order of business if re-elected.
Biological boys will not be in the change room with biological girls.
The first mention of the promise came yesterday in light of recent complaints around gender and change rooms at a rural school. Today, Moe doubled down on his position.
This most certainly is about having appropriate spaces for children and supporting children in our school system, all children in our school system.
Since the initial announcement, the 2 trans children at the center of the complaints were outed in an online publication, something the Sask party says it had nothing to do with.
No leader, community or political or otherwise, should aid in any way in the outing or othering of children.
The Saskatchewan NDP calls it ugly politics, and one trans advocate believes the policy could further alienate trans kids already impacted by the province's pronoun policy.
Imagine being those kids. You just want to use a change room, go to the bathroom, you just want to live your life. You're not thinking about the premier, you're just trying to be a kid.
Moe's campaign promise comes just days before advanced voting begins.
It's a little bit strange from a party that's in the position the Sask party is in.
This political expert says historically, SNAP campaign announcements come from parties in trouble of losing the election, which is not necessarily the case for the Saskatchewan party.
Mainstream right parties do get scared that they could lose voters to far-right parties and take action in response.
Voters will get a chance to respond with their decision starting next week in advanced polls. Election Day is October 28th. Alison Bamford, CTV News, Regina.
Tensions within the Liberal government will come to a head next week when some caucus members are expected to formally ask the Prime Minister to resign. Justin Trudeau's inner circle is meanwhile trying to limit the damage, even as MPs announce planned departures from the party. CTV's Judy Trin has more.
That next year I turn 65.
Dan Vandel is one of 4 cabinet ministers who announced on Thursday that they won't seek re-election.
I'm very confident that the polls are going to tighten up as time goes on.
But will the Prime Minister be there for the turnaround? Next Wednesday, a group of 30 backbenchers, mainly from southwestern Ontario and Atlantic Canada, are expected to formally ask Justin Trudeau to step down when the 152-member caucus meets.
There is going to be a wide range of views. I am absolutely confident that the vast majority of members of our caucus support the Prime Minister.
The revolt materialized when Justin Trudeau was out of the country at an economic conference in Laos. News of the secret plan broke. While Trudeau was in the air 1 week ago, the turbulence hasn't stopped since he landed.
It is inexplicable and, quite frankly, concerning.
On Tuesday, Trudeau testified at a public inquiry that Conservative names were on a list of parliamentarians at risk of foreign interference.
They were anything but spontaneous, and it was a planned hit on Poilievre to distract.
Polls show the Liberals neck and neck with the NDP, but about 20 points behind the Conservatives. The Minister of Sport insists that's not why she's not running.
I feel like if the polls had been higher, it would have been easier to walk away knowing Delta would be in good hands and knowing the country was headed in a good direction.
I think, we lose people at every election. We've lost people, and it's not just us. It's a natural thing if you look at other parties.
At least 14 Liberal MPs won't be on the ballot next time around, and finding their replacement candidates will be a challenge, given the party's poor performance in recent by-elections. Heather.
Judy, thank you. Coming up, the Halloween candy crunch.
Chances are you're not going to see as much chocolate.
Why Rockets and Tootsie Rolls might dominate treat bags. Plus, Canadians step into the wrestling ring. Honda is recalling thousands of hybrid vehicles in Canada over the increased risk of fire. The company says around 61,000 vehicles dated 2023 to 2025 have been recalled due to a defective part in the fuel pump. Honda says it will contact affected owners by mail in December. Vehicle owners can also contact Honda or check online to see if their model is affected. Going trick-or-treating this year? Well, you may end up with more chips over chocolate. Rising cocoa prices could scare off shoppers and change the handouts on Halloween night. CTV's Peter Sperling has the story.
Spooky ghost for Halloween?
2-year-old Anderson is going to be a ghost for Halloween this year. His costume good to go, and Mom Melina Brenton is planning for the big night too.
I'm more of a trick-or-treater with my children because I have 4 of them, and I've noticed that a lot of people are just giving out chips now instead of chocolate or candy.
And thinks this year there may also be less chocolate.
I feel like it's going to be a lot of the same, a lot of plain chips. But I mean, we're not complaining and we get what we get.
Chips and candy over chocolate? A choice driven by cost.
So you're likely going to see less chocolate, unfortunately. And I know that chocolate is very popular with the kids, with trick-or-treaters. But yeah, chances are you're not going to see as much chocolate. Chocolate prices have skyrocketed in the last year or so. It's at $7,700 a ton right now, which is double what it was last year.
We have more Halloween stuff coming in as well.
At Lollies and Scoops in Manotick, they're stocking up for Halloween.
The old style lollipops, the Tootsie Rolls.
Lots of nostalgic, retro candy, many favorites. But this year,
our trends aren't supporting chocolate. We haven't ordered any for this year.
And while Sarah Lyons isn't sure if price is the reason, selling it this Halloween would have cost more.
So like most of our bags here are ranging from $12 to $20 just based on the contents. The chocolate was that, if not more. And we try to keep a lot of our things affordable.
She says chocolate would have sold for
probably $25, if not more.
These are the lollipops for Halloween.
Master chocolate maker Henrik Stube says he's faced with higher ingredient costs.
15% for dark chocolate up, 20% for milk, and 25% for white chocolate.
He believes the price of cocoa has stabilized for now.
People are still buying chocolate. They might buy a little less, but they still buy if it's the quality they want.
Peter Sperling, CTV News.
Still ahead, the frozen yogurt faux pas.
Get out of the store, sir.
I will.
The scoop on this shocking incident in BC. A bizarre theft forced a frozen yogurt shop in Richmond, BC to close its doors earlier this week.
Get out of the store, sir.
I will.
Watch as a man goes behind the counter at Timothy's frozen yogurt and with his bare hand grabs a scoop. The shop had to close for the rest of the day and change out the food in that section. RCMP have now charged a man with 1 count of mischief and say he's banned from the shop. We have dramatic video of a daring rescue in Minnesota.
You're doing awesome. We'll get you down.
Emergency personnel climbed up more than 75 meters to save a man who somehow got stuck up a radio tower. They managed to rappel down safely, and the man was taken to hospital. Well, an unusual sight in Egypt has gone viral. A stray dog was spotted climbing the Great Pyramid of Giza, possibly chasing a bird or perhaps just taking in the view. The hound made it down to the ground safely. Quite the sight. Well, after the break.
This is, in some ways my love letter to professional wrestling.
One man's plan to put Windsor on the world stage. An Ontario man is bringing pro wrestling back to Canada, reviving an old brand for the first time in 40 years. Hoping to find the next Bret Hart, Maple Leaf Pro Wrestling hits the mat this weekend in Windsor. CTV's Chris Campbell has the story.
This is, in some ways my love letter to professional wrestling.
The revival of Maple Leaf Pro Wrestling is set to whip Windsor onto the world stage.
I think what we have here is really, truly something special. Because when you talk about wrestling in Canada, there's nothing bigger historically than Maple Leaf Wrestling.
Building off its rich Canadian history and finding new champions.
Canada has not had its own national promotion in 40 years. So that opportunity to go out there and do that now, I think is truly something that people should be excited about.
Following his departure from TNA Wrestling earlier this year, Border City Wrestling Scott Demore, now MLP president, says he took a chance and acquired a legendary company that's been dormant for the last 4 decades.
Maple Leaf Wrestling was, the standard bearer of Canadian wrestling for a very long time.
Two-time world champion Josh Alexander says getting noticed on the world stage has been a long-time hurdle for Canadian grapplers, but he's confident that won't be a problem after this weekend's event. 60% of the wrestlers are Canadian.
I'm just buzzing to get out there and, have a showcase for Canadian wrestling.
It's not just huge for Canada, it's huge for Windsor as well.
Local wrestling historian Jamie Greer says Windsor is viable on the global scale.
Yeah, when you combine that history of Windsor with the history of Maple Leaf Wrestling itself, which goes back to 1930, that you've got a recipe for success.
Demore believes professional wrestling is at an all-time high.
A rising tide lifts all boats.
He wants to launch careers while relaunching the brand. He says Maple Leaf Pro Wrestling is what got him hooked in the first place decades ago.
It was watching wrestling in the hospital just down the street from here with my grandfather as he was battling for his life, and that was the one thing that gave me joy at that time. And now to be sitting here literally, I think it's 42 years later, and have the opportunity to relaunch that brand. This is my opportunity to give back everything that it's given to me.
Chris Campbell, CTV News.
An exciting night for wrestling fans. That is our newscast for this Friday night. I'm Heather Butts. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Good night, and I'll see you again tomorrow.
CTV National News, Canada's #1 newscast. It's #1 newscast for excellence in journalism.
We begin tonight with breaking news.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina, winner of the Canadian Screen Award for Best National Newscast. Watch weeknights at 11.